Hi everyone. Okay, we're going to get started. Let's see. Well, welcome to Introduction to Digitization. This presentation is brought to you by the Documentary Heritage and Preservation Services for New York, or DHPSNY. I'm Tamara Talansky from the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts, and I will be introducing you to some of the basics of digitization, as well as discussing digital preservation and what you need to consider before you start any digitization project. Jason Henn is with me today, and he will be helping with any technical assistance and is available through the chat window if you have any DHPSNY related inquiries. If you have actual questions throughout the webinar, please enter them in the questions window on the sidebar. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about DHPSNY. DHPSNY is a 5-year initiative just getting off the ground now to deliver essential training and services to New York's collecting institutions. These services include archival needs assessments, preservation and conservation surveys, guidance with strategic planning, and access to a variety of educational programs and workshops. DHPSNY is making these services available free of charge to New York-based organizations that collect, preserve, and make accessible historical records and/or library research materials. Sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulty. Give me one moment. Sorry about that. Okay. DHPSNY is a collaboration between two long-running New York programs, the New York State Archives Documentary Heritage Program and the New York State Library Conservation and Preservation Program. It was established in 2016 by the New York State Education Department's Office of Cultural Education to ensure consistent and comprehensive services to the vast network of organizations that safeguard New York's records and make them accessible. As an aside, but a very important aside, I should note that the DHP grants and the library's conservation preservation grants are active during this period. Both programs are currently accepting applications with deadlines in January of 2017. If you have additional questions about these or any other DHPSNY matters, please go to dhpsny.org or email info@dhpsny.org, which is on the slide here. Or again, you can chat with Jason here today. So let's get started. Figuring out what to do first is always overwhelming. In order to have a cohesive program, you need a plan. We're going to touch on a lot of different subjects, from what exactly is digitization, why it's important, how you can implement it at your institution, all the way to discussing hardware, software, formats, and long-term management. So firstly, let's quickly define these two terms, which sometimes get used interchangeably, but they're actually quite different. Digitization versus digital preservation. So digitization, according to the federal agency's Digitization Guidelines Initiative, or FAGI, digitization is the process of recording an analog signal in digital form, commonly for increased access or for preservation purposes. In other words, digitization is converting data or an image into something digital, such as scanning or photographing. Digital preservation, on the other hand, according to the American Library Association, it combines policies, strategies, and actions to ensure access to reformatted and born digital content regardless of the challenges of media failure and technological change. The goal of digital preservation is the accurate rendering of authenticated content over time. So it's really important to understand the difference between them, as one is a means to an end, using the physical object along with hardware to produce the digital image, the actual digitization. The other is a long-term commitment. It's a way of ensuring long-lasting access through policy development and an institution's dedication to preserving the content into the future. It requires active management over time. And also it requires commitment from staff to keep policies updated. For the purpose of this webinar, we will predominantly be discussing digitization factors and planning, but next we will touch on digital preservation policies, but just briefly. A well-defined digital preservation policy is essential in order for any institution to carry out its mission to preserve digital content. The goal is to cultivate a long-term repository for our digital materials and to better serve the shared objective to preserve digital content. A policy will depict the need and methodologies for protecting the digital content. These preservation accomplishments will guarantee that faculty, staff, researchers, students, visitors, or any additional users will have continuing access to the growing digital resources at the institution. A digital preservation policy will lay out and define such things as the purpose, why you want to preserve your digital treasures, any goals and objectives of your institution, any challenges your institution may face, such as identifying changes in media or equipment, or costs associated with digital preservation, or perhaps maintaining collaborative relationships. We'll also go over best practices for making the content available, and stakeholders, who exactly will be involved. A good preservation policy will define scope and content types. Not only is a good digital preservation policy a great way to lay out methods for protecting and preserving your collections, it's also a great tool to obtain funding for collections care, digital preservation, upkeep, and management, and for inclusion in grant applications. So when you're designing a digital imaging project, a digital plan is a must. Before you start any project, you need to ask some basic questions. Why are you digitizing? Who is the audience? Who else needs to be involved? For instance, are there key staff or collaborators outside of your institution? What should you digitize? How do you decide what criteria to select these materials? Are you scanning for preservation purposes? What about copyright? And hardware, software, and best practices and standards in the industry? Will it be in-house or will you outsource it? And how do you manage and deliver the files? It's important to ask your institution these questions before jumping into a digitization program of any kind. So let's start with the why. So you've decided you want to digitize. Why? The use of technology has become a core part of an institution's mission. It's important to figure out exactly why you want to digitize and have a plan. There are several general reasons that institutions or individuals may want to digitize their materials or their collections. These are just a few of the reasons. Access or outreach, to reach a broad range of users. Preservation, to protect the original and reduce handling. And storage needs, allowing you to free up space. I'm going to go into a few more specifics of each to explain their advantages. The primary and usually the most obvious advantage of digitization is that it enables greater access to collections of all types. All manner of material can be digitized and delivered in electronic form. Digital materials can be made available to a broader audience than those who have the resources or ability to travel to see the analog collections. People can simultaneously view or use the same document from multiple locations. It is possible to search, browse, and compare materials in useful and creative ways. Patrons may be able to browse through thumbnails of the materials in image catalogs, including images of materials that were previously inaccessible, such as glass plate negatives, oversized, or fragile materials. Digitization may also promote outreach to professors, research institutes, and scholarly communities, as well as sharing photos on social media platforms. Another common motivation is preservation. Developing a digital surrogate of a rare or fragile original object can provide access to users while preventing the original from damage by handling or display, since often the fragile condition of these collections prevents their use. Digitization assists in keeping original materials secure, as the originals will not need to be handled as often. So, though digitization is not yet a preservation medium, it definitely has a preservation component. It's excellent for minimizing wear and tear on the original. It's preferred for paper-based materials, and it's widely embraced by scholars and preferred over microfilm. Though there are some drawbacks. Media obsolescence concerns, records may need to be reformatted and copied to new supported technologies that are more commonplace in the future. Eventually, we will progress by developing and refining different techniques for preserving different digital formats. Another concern is cost. You certainly don't want to waste money by creating digital objects that can't be preserved, so create the best quality digital images possible now. Ultimately, providing access to digital copies enables the user to reduce the use of fragile originals. So in that sense, digitization is a type of preservation. A third big advantage is storage. Many organizations still depend on paper-based record keeping, and there are a lot of challenges with that. First, the lack of storage space. Collections may require a significant amount of space to store, and that only gets bigger as the amount of documents grow over time. Paper records need to be stored close at hand for quick access, which is not always practical. Materials may be prone to damage. Over time, paper quality deteriorates. There could be natural disasters. Maybe a flood or storm or an earthquake could happen at any time or place. Document vulnerability. The loss of any critical document of value causes a serious problem. There's also the possibility of a confidential document being accessed by unwanted or unauthorized people who may even tamper with it or steal it. And then there are also costs. There can be numerable costs such as storing, shelving, retrieving and cataloging the materials, not to mention the cost of building libraries, the cost of power for heat, light, and air conditioning for those buildings, which are all direct costs to the institution or individual. So next we're going to talk about your audience and workflow. So who is your audience? Who will use the images and who will benefit from your project? Some materials can and will be used by different audiences, but they will use them differently. Narrowing the audience will help you make these decisions. So how do you identify your audience? Are they cultural organizations, general users, students, researchers, scholars, genealogists, business communities, universities? The list really goes on and on. A good goal is to make things available that both scholars and a broader audience will find interesting. Knowing your users will help you determine what materials you select, the software and resolution needs of the scans, what kind of equipment you'll need, hardware and software, what kinds of technical and metadata choices. How will the digital reproductions of the object be used? Will it be used in publications or school projects? Do they need to print these resources out? Are they web-based or are they for a specific class? Deciding how the materials will be used will impact how you design and plan for your digitization project. You also need to define roles and responsibilities of various staff and stakeholders. These are people who will be accountable or responsible for particular digital imaging or preservation strategies. Will it be in-house staff, creating skills for them to be able to contribute to a project? Or perhaps there'll be project staff, Will you be hiring or reassigning some staff? Technical support. You should really become allies with your IT department. Are there partners outside of the organization? Are there area experts that you'd want to work with? Or volunteers, maybe from local historical groups or local genealogists? Collaborative efforts involving 2 or more organizations can often help draw grant funding. Also consider, are there any potential funders you can reach out to, or general users and patrons? Again, these are the people that are supportive of your digitization or your digital preservation efforts, and they can help drive the process. So based on how much material you have and what preservation actions you're taking, or in other words, based on what needs to be done, you will need staff to fill the following functions: a selection and research of materials, the actual scanning, creating metadata for these records, file management and backups, quality control, website design, tech support, and project management. Sometimes digital imaging projects will involve staff beyond those specifically assigned to the project. So some additional skills you may need to consider: conservation treatment, photographic skills and techniques, database administration, and computer programming. So when starting digital imaging initiatives, it's really important to consider managerial issues. Among responsibilities that fall to project managers are the following: setting realistic timelines, objectives, and expectations for the project, determining the best approach for accomplishing project goals, developing and defending budgets, facilitating communication among project participants, including outside vendors, monitoring production, which includes quality and costs, and of course looking beyond the project's end. So next we're going to talk a little bit about selection of materials, and we'll touch briefly on copyright. But I just wanted to pause for a second and just see if there was any specific questions anyone had before I go on. I feel like I'm just going, but if there's anything that you want me to address right now before we move on to the next section, I'd be happy to answer anything. Okay. Okay. So how do you decide what to digitize? It's important to establish and define the criteria to help prioritize what you will be digitizing. You need to prioritize things. This list is just some of the criteria that can affect the selection of materials for digitization. This criteria should be used to evaluate which collections to consider first, depending on the degree of emphasis on access and preservation goals of your institution, and may be based on a number of factors, including the source's physical condition. For those items that are rare, unique, fragile, you need to decide, is it safe to digitize without damaging the original? Some collection items may need minimal conservation treatment or stabilization by trained conservators before they can be safely transported, handled, and digitized. Items in poor condition due to damage or fragility are candidates for digital reformatting. The selection of material will almost always be content-driven. Digitization can offer significant added value both in terms of access and functionality. Uniqueness. How unique is the item? Original materials that are in high demand are strong candidates for digital reformatting. Accessibility. As we talked about earlier, to improve access and outreach, it's one of the most important goals for any institution. And how about the cultural significance of your institution, the audience, and the mission? So this is a sample collections matrix. It rates various collections, and in order for you to prioritize your collections based on these different variables that are listed. And I actually attached this form in the sidebar under attachments or handouts. So you can, there's two in there, one we'll get to later, but the first one is called the sample collections matrix, and it can be really handy if you have a lot of different collections and you're not certain exactly which ones to do first. This matrix can really help to prioritize all of these different variables as we just talked about. So there are also some materials that you may choose not to digitize for a variety of reasons. And this slide that you're seeing here is taken from the Library of Congress website. I didn't attach it as a separate document, but you can always go back to this slide and take a look at it. But some items require more involved and extensive repair, or they're so fragile that they cannot easily be stabilized. For these items, preservation specialists need to discuss treatment options with the curator of the collection. I could go through some of these, but basically I'll just sort of go through it very quickly, but paper that's acidic, fragile, torn, has missing pieces, or sticky, any paper documents with three-dimensional objects attached may need to be excluded, paper with iron gall ink that's eating into the page, loose, flaking, or friable media, books with severe leather deterioration, photographs that are separating from their mount or that are curled, bent, creased. There's so many reasons why materials may not be eligible for digitization. So it's nice to have something like this to refer to, and also it's always great to be able to talk to a conservator if you're able to, if you're concerned about something. So as I mentioned, I wanted to touch on copyright. We won't talk a lot about that, but it's extremely important. Just because it's in your collection, it doesn't mean that you're allowed to do whatever you want with it. So how do you know if you have the right to reformat or redistribute something or distribute something? Before you digitize, you need to make an effort to track down the copyright. Some things to consider. Does your institution own the copyright or have permission to distribute? Again, just because you own it doesn't mean you have the copyright. If you don't know, you will need to find out. Does the donor hold the rights? If so, you will need to contact them. And do you have a clear documentation of gifts? This is a good time to review or revisit your deed of gift. If you need to, you can modify the agreement to include rights or permissions to publish. So this next slide is, as it says, a list of copyright resources for you to refer to, and it's pretty comprehensive. It goes over so many different types of copyright, and I thought this would just be something nice for you guys to have to be able to refer to. So there's that. Okay, so next we're going to start talking more about quality control. We'll touch on best practices, tools, formats, metadata, etc. So all institutions need to adhere to current industry standards and best practices, especially as it relates to selection, acquisition, upkeep, and the distribution of your digital assets and content. This also includes their accompanying metadata. The content needs to remain meaningful and readable. So the next couple of slides lists out some Besser principles. Howard Besser, a scholar of digital preservation from UCLA and NYU, he has been working on scanning projects for nearly 20 years. And these are some of his principles, most of which he says were, quote, learned the hard way. So I'm just going to try to briefly run through these, give you a little more information. But the first one, scan or capture at the highest resolution appropriate to the informational content of the originals. Remember, the higher the resolution, the larger the files, which means you'll need more storage capabilities. Resolution will change depending on the type of material that you're digitizing. Capture or scan at an appropriate level of quality to avoid rescanning and rehandling of the originals in the future. So in other words, scan once. It's a good idea to practice with non-fragile items. Create a master image file that can be used to produce derivative image files and serve a variety of current and future user needs. You'll need high-quality derivatives, TIFFs, which we're going to talk about shortly. Use system components that are non-proprietary. These are easier to migrate and revise in the future. Use image file formats and compression techniques that conform to industry standards. And this is something we're going to go over shortly. Create backup copies of all files on a stable medium. The more you can make, the better. Store your backups in a climate-controlled area, one off-site if possible. We'll talk more about backups as well later. Use high-quality servers or backup drives, and make sure to have refreshing strategies in place. Create meaningful metadata for image files or collections. We're going to go over this a little bit later. Store your media in an appropriate environment. Monitor and recopy data as necessary, performing quality control on backups. Without this, it may just render them worthless in the long run. Outline a migration strategy for transferring data across generations of technology. This is something that can also be defined in a digital preservation policy if you create one. And anticipate and plan for future technological developments. Migration and preservation strategy can be difficult. So this resource has a great introduction to designing a digitization project, the guidelines for planning the digitization of rare book and manuscript collections. I know it sounds extremely specific, but it actually has a great series of basic questions to help define goals and resources that your institution might need, much like what we've already talked about, such as what's the vision of the project, who should be involved, what you want to digitize and why, and how you'll incorporate quality management for the project. I just think it's a really great tool, so I just wanted to attach that for you. So when there's a question about using non-proprietary components. So in other words, when you're creating derivatives, you don't want to use something that is proprietary to a particular manufacturer. So in other words, if you've heard of TIFFs or JPEGs, these are components that can be used, these types of formats can be used across multiple platforms. You can use it in Photoshop, you can use it, if someone has sent you a JPEG, in other words, you can open that regardless because it is non-proprietary. It's not owned by anyone in particular, so anyone can use it. Does that clear that up for them? Okay. Okay, great. So here's another resource slide. I know you're going to say she loves resources, but I think these are just some really, again, really good tools and resources to keep you with best standards and practices for digitization, which is extremely important. So this list is going to cover a lot of different types of best practices, anything from technical overviews, capture specifications, hardware, software, metadata, rights, workflow, file naming, storage, and on and on and on. So a lot of them cover many of these topics, but you'll see as you look through these, after this, that a lot of them, even though they touch on a lot of the same things, some of them, you might be drawn to for various reasons or depending on what your institution is interested in digitizing. And then this one these are the standards organizations. I took this list from the Library of Congress website, and again, these are just these three particular sites are just something that you should be familiar with. So at this point, we've looked at some of those big picture issues before making a commitment to digitize, but now we're going to focus on some of the more technical aspects of digitization. Digitization technologies allow users to control the bit depth, the resolution, the size, the color, and other qualities that affect how the image appears on a computer screen or is output to a printer. So let's talk about these three elements separately. When you scan a photo or a document, the scanning device creates a digital image consisting of tens of thousands and sometimes millions of different colored tiny dots called pixels or picture elements. These small dots make up the images you see on your computer. Normally, you can't see individual pixels because they're so small, which is good because most people want to look at a smooth image rather than a pixelated one. But the dimensions of a digital image are expressed in terms of these pixels. Pixels are the smallest physical element of a digital display device that the eye can discern. Zoom in close to a photo on your computer screen and you'll see them. They're rows and rows of tiny little squares. So you may have seen, for instance, 800 by 600 or 1520 by 1280. These are the pixels. So it's 800 pixels by 600 pixels, 1520 pixels by 1280 pixels, etc. Also note, digitizing is not limited to text or images. You can also digitize video and audio, but in this presentation, we will just be discussing documents and photos. Bit depth is a measurement of the number of bits of data, or number of colors, per pixel. So the more bits per pixel, or bit depth, the more information the pixel contains, and this means better quality. So we've got several different ones. We've got black and white, or bit tonal. This is just 1 bit per pixel, and so it only contains 2 actual colors, black and white. It's a monochromatic image. The most common setting for grayscale is 8 bits per pixel. And that would yield about 256 shades of gray. And the most common setting for color is 24 bits per pixel. And that would yield about 16.7 million color tones. Some scanners also do 16-bit grayscale and 48-bit color. With more bits per pixel, you will have more to work with if you are going to edit the photo, but this also increases the data and the file size. Here's an example from color, 24-bit, 8-bit color. There's your 8-bit black and white, and then your 1-bit, your bit tonal, with just 2 physical colors, black and white. The next element is resolution. Resolution is determined by the number of pixels used to present an image. It is expressed in dots per inch, or DPI, which usually refers to the number of dots of ink in a printed inch, or pixels per inch, PPI, which usually refers to the pixel density of on-screen images. In either case, it is a measurement of pixel density. Commercial scanners generally use the term DPI. The more pixels or dots you have in a 1-inch square space, the more detail an image can hold. So increasing the number of pixels used to capture an image will result in a higher resolution and capture of finer detail. Remember though, more DPI is not always better, as you can only scan so much detail at one time. Beyond that limited amount of detail, more DPI cannot add anything of value. So we have optimum settings for different photo sizes and types, or document sizes and types. For most personal work, like for snapshot prints and common enlargements, such as 4x6, 5x7, 8x10, would be 300 to 400 DPI. For small prints or slides, you would need around 1400 to 1500 DPI. Since they're so small and they hold a lot of detail in this small area, you need to capture more dots per inch in order to obtain more detail. If you want a close-up, such as an enlargement of a face in a crowd, for instance, increasing the DPI in order to get the size you want is one way to do it, but keep in mind that the quality may not be as good once you've changed the DPI and zoomed in. Negatives, you're looking at around 1500 to 2000 DPI, again, since they hold so much detail. Remember, increasing the DPI will always increase the file size because you're adding more data to the file. When choosing your resolution and your bit depth, remember your overall project mission and your audience, and that will help you select the proper specifications. Here are two excellent resources for more specific technical details. The first is from the American Library Association, which has great minimum capture guidelines. It breaks down almost every type of source content. And then the Cornell link is a great overall tool and tutorial, which covers anything from basic technology to project management. So once captured, a digital image can be saved in numerous file formats that may or may not include compression technologies that reduce the size of the file. Scanner software saves your scans as a digital file in a format that you choose. The ones that we're going to focus on today are the most common file formats for digital photos, and those are TIFF and JPEG. We will also be going over PDF files. There are also lots of other types of files, GIFs, PDFAs, audio and video files, and a plethora of other file formats, but for our use here, we are going to mainly be discussing TIFFs and JPEGs and touch on PDFs. So before we head into talking about the different file formats, I just wanted to define a couple of terms. Part of the reason for the plethora of file types is the need for compression. Image files can be quite large, and larger file types mean more disk usage and slower downloads. Compression is a term used to describe ways of cutting the size of the file, allowing them to download faster and take up less space. Compression schemes can be lossless or lossy. With lossless compression, the image preserves all of the file's original data, discarding no information. It looks for more efficient ways to represent an image while making no compromises in accuracy. This is very common in TIFF images, which makes them much larger. Lossy compression, on the other hand, discards most of the data. There is some degradation in the image and data loss in order to achieve a smaller file size. Files can actually be reduced up to 1,000 times. Because of this, a bit of quality is also lost. This is very common in JPEGs. Here's an example of lossless versus lossy. So as I just mentioned, the main difference between the two has to do with compression, squeezing down this digital data in order to make a smaller file. TIFFs are uncompressed. For TIFFs, there are many options too. There's no compression or uncompressed, as well as what's called LZW, lossless compression, which basically means it will cut the size of the file in half without losing any digital data. As an aside, LZW, the name of that is just the first letter of the last name of the 3 scientists who created this type of compression algorithm. But just note with this, with LZW, even though it cuts the file size in half, the files are still quite big. But when you have a large archive or collection, even a 50% reduction will reduce storage requirements and, hopefully costs over time. JPEGs, on the other hand, are compressed. Saving images as a JPEG employs a lossy compression. JPEG files lose some of the digital data captured by the scanner. But the good news is you can choose JPEG quality levels from maximum to lowest quality. So when you're saving, it will give you that option. So I just want to go over some of the advantages and disadvantages of using TIFFs versus JPEGs. We'll start with TIFFs. TIFF stands for Tagged Image File Format. Their advantages, well, they're very popular among users and they are gaining more and more recognition in the graphic design field. They are the format of choice for long-term archiving. Since they do not compress to make smaller files, they are meant to preserve quality. They have a lossless compression, as we've talked about. This also makes it the best option for printing and editing. It's very easy to use with software that deals with page layout, publishing, and photo manipulation. They can be saved with layers, which is another good thing for editing, or if you need to re-edit the file later. It's a high-quality image format and supported by many imaging programs. It can be used for files up to a bit depth of 64, and it can be tagged with basic metadata. Disadvantages: it's a very large file size, so you cannot use them online. They have a very long transfer time. They take up a large amount of disk space, and they have a very slow loading time. So JPEG is short for Joint Photographic Experts Group, and it's the most popular among the image formats used on the web, as it's the most widely used and accepted format. It's the standard for web display since the file is so much smaller. Takes up less room, requires less time to transfer to websites, so the loading time is faster. It can achieve considerable size reductions. It can be used for files up to 24-bit and support a full spectrum of up to 16 million colors. Some of the disadvantages, though: they are lower quality images. They are losing quality with their high degree of compression. So as we talked about, they're very lossy. Much of their information is lost from the original when you save it this way. This becomes a lot more evident if they are edited and resized, so they are usually not a good choice for editing or printing, and they are not good for archiving images. JPEG should never be seen as a format of choice for digital masters, but just as a good choice for web delivery. Due to their reduction of quality, they should not be used for long-term preservation. There's also something called the JPEG 2000, which some of you may be familiar with. It is a bit contested in the cultural heritage community. Some do want to start using it for master files since it takes up less space and it can reduce storage costs. But TIFF is still the current recommended format in the industry under, for best practices and standards. TIFF is still technically still the best format or the recommended format. But I think JPEG 2000 is quickly on its heels. So here's an example of JPEG compression on various levels. As you keep compressing the image, you see you lose more and more data. So you've probably all used or received PDFs at some point. PDF stands for Portable Document Format. The PDF file format was developed by Adobe to create this portable format. It captures the printed intent of a document. The advantage against other formats is that you can be sure that anyone will view the file exactly as you want on other computer systems. The free Adobe Reader is widely available for almost all computer systems. PDF files are very small, and the content can also be stored compressed. But even though it's compressed, it's still a great way to view and print images at a high resolution. So for instance, if you wanted to send some high resolution images off to a printer, you can make PDF files of the TIFFs you created so that they can get the best quality. These can then be emailed. Since they're so small, you can actually email the PDF. But keep in mind, PDFs are not in lieu of TIFFs. They are created from TIFF image files, but they're still simply document files, so they cannot be edited the way TIFFs can. PDFs are also a good solution if you want to upload and distribute a document to the internet or a photo. So there's also the PDF-A, which some institutions have begun using with the thought that they are better for long-term archiving. Again, another something still up for debate in the industry, but since they use embedded fonts in their format versus just linking fonts, which a regular PDF does, they will be a little bit larger than traditional PDFs. But it is supposed to guarantee reliable reproduction over time, regardless of the application or system that was used to create the file, since all of these fonts are embedded within the file. So a good rule of thumb is to scan your document or photo as a TIFF and then keep this as your master file. You can make copies of it for editing, as well as make JPEGs and PDFs of each file for easy storage and usability. But remember, never edit your master file. Okay, so metadata. One of the most important parts of digitization is the information that gets recorded in each file in a way that makes them easy to identify later on. So let's talk a bit about metadata. This is not a simple conversation as there are so many different metadata schemas, and I'm certainly not the expert on metadata, but I would like to give you some of the basics. At its most basic level, metadata is something that helps to better describe the data you're trying to remember. It's data about data, so it's information that tells you something about the digital image you've saved. It's a way of tagging the internal digital information of the file and used to describe things such as the type, size, the purpose, the date and or time, maybe people, place, etc. Metadata can be attached to any file so that searching by a keyword or tag helps locate the digital record later on. So there are many different types of metadata. These are the three main types: descriptive, structural, and administrative. And there are two subsets of administrative: rights management and preservation metadata. And this link here at the bottom, the CDP Dublin Core Metadata Best Practices, it's from the Collaborative Digitization Program. It's a really great resource, provides guidelines for creating metadata records for digitized cultural heritage resources, so I thought that would be a good one. So the first one is descriptive metadata. Describes an object, and it includes items such as keywords, author, title, dimensions, type of media, etc. This information is really helpful for creating finding aids. Some important decisions you might want to think about: what information do your users need? What categories or browse functions should you be considering? What will help the audience when they're searching? The second type is structural. Structural metadata pinpoints the relationships between objects. For example, maybe it'll say something like insert D was attached to journal number 5. It's just basically what ties everything together. It's the internal structure, such as the order of pages in a chapter or individual diary entries in a diary section of a book. It may also include page numbering or the table of contents of a book. Administrative metadata, information for managing resources such as the file type, when and how it was created, and the technical information such as the hardware and software. This is also referred to as technical metadata, so you may have seen it elsewhere as technical metadata. Two important subsets of this are rights management, which is metadata dealing specifically with intellectual property rights and copyright, and then preservation metadata. It's information about archiving and managing preservation activities. It tracks preservation activities throughout the life cycle of a digital object, and it records actions taken to preserve content, both the analog and digital forms of the objects. It's important to develop a style guide, make the metadata consistent, and have quality control. Determine a workflow. Who will be entering this metadata, and how will it be entered, and who will approve it? And then I just listed some of the more common fields: author, creator, copyright, credit, description, keywords, titles, location fields. This could be city, state, country, country code, continent, a date created or updated, and original file names. These are just some of the fields that you can enter. So next we're going to talk a little bit about hardware, software, and preparing your scanner. The equipment used and its performance has an important impact on the quality of the image. You should choose equipment that will be suitable for the materials that you are digitizing. What scanner is right for your project depends on the format, size, and condition of your materials. For materials for which people will want to study minute details of an object, high-resolution digital cameras are recommended. For documents and photograph collections, flatbed scanners are well suited. Special book scanners and cradles can also be used for a wide range of printed and bound books. Consider choosing a scanning system that provides the best digital images possible within the limitations of your resources. So I was going to go a little more in depth, just a little bit of detail about some of the different types of scanners that individuals or organizations may use. The following couple of slides are actually adapted from a presentation that Tom Clarison from Lyrasis gave on digitization basics, so these couple of slides may look familiar. I just wanted to touch briefly on some of these types of scanners. So flatbed scanners, they're suitable for paper, flat photographs, and printed materials. Slide scanners, they digitize transparent materials such as slides and film. And also to note, some flatbed scanners also have capabilities to scan slides and film. Open book scanners, they're designed to digitize books without any damage to the original, which is frequently caused from flattening the book on a flatbed. These can be extremely expensive. Drum scanners, these are also quite expensive, mostly used by press and graphics communities working with contemporary materials. The materials are actually affixed to a drum that rotates at high speed around a sensor, so these are not recommended for cultural heritage materials. Wide format scanners, these are designed to digitize large format materials such as architectural blueprints or maps. Again, materials are drawn over the scanning sensors using drums. So there is danger of damage, rips, or tears. So it's, again, not recommended for cultural heritage materials. Don't put anything through there that you're not prepared to lose. And then digital cameras. You can digitize large format materials such as maps, posters, 3D objects, and artwork. These might require a digital camera. Most digital cameras do not have the capacity to create sufficient resolution for preservation capture of the materials. However, some professional level cameras produce very high quality images. The right choice for you depends on your project, your goals, your materials, and your budget. Try to think ahead and be flexible. In general, the flatbed scanner with a large scanning bed is relatively inexpensive and flexible for a variety of materials. But if you're only scanning books, it may be the wrong choice for you. So here are just some examples of scanners. There are a couple of book scanners along with flatbed scanners. Some more scanners. These are large format book scanners. The one on the left, the system is all built in. The one on the right actually has camera and separate components that you can switch out. So as the actual system ages, you can switch out cameras. As the media becomes obsolete, you can switch out lenses and different backs for that system. These are very expensive. So now we're going to talk a little bit about software. There's scanner software. This is the software that controls the scanner and passes information to computer storage or your image editing software. Most scanners come with this already built in. Higher end scanners come with software that allows the operator to manually adjust the scanner settings. Scanner software must be able to output image files in the appropriate file formats. As we discussed earlier, your software must be able to create TIFFs, for example. Next, we have image editing software. This allows you to manipulate images, create derivative image file formats. Photoshop is something that most people are familiar with anyway. It's sort of the standard in the industry for this type of software. It will require staff training, future upgrades, and you do need to make sure that your computer has the minimum requirements for that software. Also note some scanning software does allow a certain amount of image manipulation capability. And then we have digital asset management software. Digital projects can result in a large number of files that need to be managed. There is software available that provides sort of an out-of-the-box solution for the creation of workflow management. You will need some kind of digital asset management software on site. We will talk about this next. So a digital asset management system, think of a DAM as your hub where your assets live, where you can move them around and work with them. The DAM creates a centralized area for users to access their assets. So in other words, they are centralized repositories of media files that are stored in a database. It's just basically one big container that manages everything about the object. Digital asset management refers to how you take in, handle, and distribute everything you have in digital form, from digital images to word processing documents. It can also refer to the protocols and tasks around ingest, storage, archiving, and distribution of assets. Your DAM system will provide an infrastructure for managing your digital assets with search capabilities to help users identify and retrieve the ones that are relevant to their needs. Some examples may include, and you may have heard of, Luna Insight, Content DM, or Islandora. So there's also what's called a CMS, or a content management system. A CMS enables the management of different types of web content. So it's a computer application used to create, edit, manage, and publish content in a consistently organized fashion. It basically helps users with no technical knowledge how to create, edit, and manage content that is delivered onto the web. It also manages information about the object itself and its associated metadata. CMS systems attach images for the web, but they do not keep track of your assets like a digital asset manager does. You may even have both at your institution. The CMS may pull data and information from your digital asset manager in order to put things onto your website. While the lines between DAM and CMS are somewhat blurred, a digital asset management system is focused on managing large collections of high-resolution digital images and videos, while CMS systems are focused on mainstream web content. It's sort of the back end of your website, allowing someone to be able to go in and do the updates. So I included a few slides on the basics of preparation for digitizing and of scanning your documents or photos. So some of this might seem like obvious. Some of it might seem a little basic, but I thought it was good to just go through anyway. So it's important to prepare your documents for scanning. Assess the condition of the materials to ensure that your documents are not too fragile for scanning, as well as general fragility. You should also look for things such as mold or pages stuck together or inserts that are obscuring any records or any damage which may have affected the legibility of the text. Remember that list I showed you earlier with materials you may wish to avoid digitizing? This is what I'm talking about. You'd want to remove any kind of hardware, any staples, pins, or paper clips. It's important to use both hands at all times when you're moving boxes and documents. Ensure the scanning beds are large enough to support the whole document. You should never leave documents exposed on the scanner when unattended. And support books and other bound documents with a book cradle or book wedges if needed. You should always turn the pages from the foredge, which is the right edge of the document, and not from the tail or the bottom edge. It is not acceptable to use moisture of any kind for page turning. This also includes licked fingers. Do not pinch document corners together to turn the page. Any scanning operator should unfold the folded corners, but should not refold them back onto themselves after they've scanned the document. Where documents are attached to each other and cannot be separated, try to scan the document in a way which prevents the introduction of new creases if you can. Take care with applied and pendant seals as they are extremely fragile. They must not be knocked or have weight or pressure applied to them. Neither should they be left to hang off the edge of a workstation. Do not use glass without adjustments approved by a conservator. The same thing applies to documents that have pigments. So we'll go over a little bit about, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was having some technical difficulties here. Uh-oh. Sorry about that. Those are out of order. Sorry about that. Oh no. Sorry everyone. I'm going to go back. Okay. Okay, so keep your documents in order. The content of your boxes should stay together and stay in the sequence in which they came from the box, much like this should have been in sequence. I'm so sorry about that. Work on only one document at a time so that boxes and documents do not get mixed up. Replace documents in closed boxes at the end of the day and return them to storage. Annotation or labeling of any part of the document should be avoided. Do not use sticky notes or post-it notes or anything similar to mark documents. In other words, nothing with adhesive. You can use paper, strips, or markers provided that you remove those from the document after scanning. The scanning area. The scanning operator's workstations should provide adequate surface area to ensure the full support of documents and allow for an organized workspace. Too little space can have a negative impact on document handling. Keep the scanning area clean and tidy. Keep bags and coats in lockers and do not take them into the scanning area. Keep workspaces free of food or drink. This includes chewing gum. You may use pencils only, no ink or felt tip, pens or markers, no colored pencils, no crayons, etc. You should not use hand or face moisturizers or moisturizing wipes or lip balms or anything similar that is applied by hand. Hands should be clean and dry at all times while handling documents. So when determining your digital plan, you need to decide if you're going to digitize in-house or whether you will be outsourcing it. You can ask yourself, will this be a one-time project? Or is your institution interested in committing to ongoing digitization efforts? Will you need special equipment? So there are pros and cons to both. Let's take a look. Establishing an in-house facility requires an institution to support the full digitization chain with appropriate staff, space and facilities, equipment and supplies, and to absorb time and expense associated with ramping up. However, some of the advantages may be learned by doing. You will learn as you go. You will allow your staff and your organization to develop experience. You'll retain direct control over the entire range of imaging functions and the entire process. You'll provide for security, proper handling, and accessibility to materials. You can prioritize your library or archives requirements. And you can maintain consistent and high-quality assurance requirements. Some disadvantages: it's a large investment in equipment and staff. There's no set per image cost. The institution pays for the expenses instead of products, including costs of downtime, training, and technology obsolescence. There may be limited production capabilities and facilities. There's a range of staffing expertise required, and the knowledge of best practices can be daunting. Some advantages to outsourcing. There's cost containment and limited risk. The institution pays for deliverables. There's usually a set price per image, which facilitates project planning and budgeting. Costs are typically lower than in-house figures. You pay only for production, no equipment and staffing. Vendors can often handle large volumes of materials. Vendors pay expenses, such as expertise, training, technology obsolescence costs. These would all be absorbed by the vendor. There's a broad range of options and services that may be available, such as imaging, metadata creation, enhancements, processing, derivative creation, printing, storing, backing up, database development, goes on and on. Some of the disadvantages: the institution is one step removed from the process. They have less control over the quality. Services are most often performed off-site and sometimes offshore. There can be vulnerability due to vendor instability. The vendor may lack experience with the needs of cultural institutions. A lack of standards and best practices with which to define requirements or negotiate for services can be a problem. There may be challenges in communication, from RFP development to contracting to production and quality requirements, and there can be security, handling, or transportation issues. Ultimately, though, both are viable options. Make the choice as early as possible, as the decision will affect virtually everything, including planning and budgeting. This is especially true if you're writing a grant. So next I want to talk a little bit about long-term management of your files. It's imperative that you make sure your files can be easily identified, organized, accessed, and maintained. We're going to talk a little bit about storage, file naming protocols, and maintenance and backups. Records, whether personal, professional, or academic, are a fundamental part of our life, and keeping track of and maintaining all of these important documents is not a simple task. Who hasn't been searching for a file and cannot find it no matter what you do? It's very important you establish some kind of file management system to keep proper records. Otherwise, your computer could end up looking something like this. We've all seen this. Consider how important it is to keep, store, maintain, find, and retrieve records when you need them. Information and records have always been a prime resource of any institution. We can't function without it. Businesses operate based on these records. Some files may need to be edited, thereby creating multiple versions which may end up being distributed among different people, employees, or even third parties, such as customers or vendors. All of these versions need to be tracked so that a specific version can be found when needed. It's very important to track the derivatives. These days, businesses are creating and receiving records at such an escalating rate, not only in huge volume, but the records come in a variety of formats, such as digital images, either ones received from outside or a scanned image, emails, word processing documents, and these documents may also exist in multiple storage media. For example, backup drives, CDs, DVDs, flash drives, local or network hard drives, the cloud. With all of these options, proper organization of archives or personal records is crucial for good file management. Many institutions, due to lack of policies and procedures on file management, can face some problems and risks. So they may keep some records for too long, or waste time looking for information, or fail to abide by record-keeping rules and regulations, and potentially fail to safeguard vital information. With almost all new information now being created in digital form or getting digitized, it's becoming increasingly important to manage and organize these files. We all need a system where we can locate files quickly and easily so you can access from anywhere when needed, as well as being able to access them on the computer and or on the cloud. You can restrict access to authorized users only, so there's added security. Digital files can be saved in secured environments using a server or encryption. You can store the documents for both short and long-term use. You can keep a safe copy to avoid disaster, which we're going to talk a little bit about later. And with digitizing large collections, since only the digital version is being used on a regular basis, the original analog version or document can be safely stored away and protected from the day-to-day access and common disasters. Next, I want to talk just a little about how to organize your files, whether for personal or business use. The task of organizing digital files can be intimidating with the thought of combining hundreds or even thousands of files, but once you have established a system, you will be able to drag and drop files and complete the project fairly quickly. There are two types of files on your computer, the ones you make and the ones you collect. You choose what these files are called and where they're stored. The main thing to remember when you're organizing and naming files is be descriptive, but keep it simple. The goal is to come up with a structure that's easy for you to remember and follow. You don't need to make it too long and complicated. Be consistent. Once you develop a technique as to how you want to label things, use it all the time. File management software, this can refer to images on your server or creating image databases for organizing your files, like the digital asset managers that we talked about earlier. Next, let's talk about naming the digital file itself. Once your photos and documents are grouped in folders and or subfolders, you should standardize the names of the photos and the documents themselves. This is for useful sorting later. Use standard file extensions so that anyone can open the file. Names for your files should be short and simple. Each name should cover the basics, capturing some of the who, what, when, where, why, making sure you add enough information so that it's organized and easy to understand, but also not making it too long. Other tips, it's a really good idea to start with the year or date, and then you can include some kind of descriptive text such as the company, the job, the client name, whatever works for your institution. You should avoid using spaces or special characters. Some software does not read special characters or spaces. You can always include an underscore to separate ideas. So here's an example using underscores, the date, CCAHA, the company name, you see it, marketing photos, etc. So there are many other ways you can name files, whatever works well for you. Many photo or digital camera programs let you automatically name a saved file as you create them, but you can also go back later and rename files for more detail and accuracy. Keep in mind that your photos or documents may one day become separated from the folder you're putting them in, so it's a good idea to include enough information in the file name to identify the file without the folder name. Here are a couple of excellent resources for more information on best practices for file naming. And actually, I attached the handout for the Stanford University Libraries, their file naming best practices. So that's over there too, if you want to retrieve that. The last, but maybe the most important aspect of file managing is backing up your files. Without a proper backup, you can lose everything. A single computer failure can wipe out your entire collection if not properly backed up. One mistake in editing your file can cause it to overwrite the original, causing the original impossible to recover. A disaster, such as a flood or a fire, could wipe out the collection if it's not properly archived and in a safe space. So the main thing to remember for backing up is the 3-2-1 rule. To lower your risk of data loss, it's imperative that you have 3 copies of your important data, ideally in 3 locations. So the 3-2-1 rule is at least 3 copies. These should be kept in different places, on at least 2 different formats, with at least 1 copy off-site. Again, this is all based on redundancy. The second and third copies should always be kept in different locations. You can keep one on hand in case you need quick recovery, but the other should be kept off-site where it isn't subject to the same threats. You have a lot of options when it comes to making backups of your files. Some examples would be keeping the original on your computer, on a hard drive or server. The second and third backups could be stored on different external hard drives. You can even have a fourth backup with an online storage company or use the cloud. The cloud is becoming more and more common for backing up and archiving files, but remember, back up the cloud as well. The more regularly you can back up, the better. Daily is, of course, optimal, but weekly is also fine. Daily or weekly is really the best. CDs and USB drives are not good for long-term storage. The media is too prone to failure or deterioration. Digital files are just becoming so precious and fragile, as are our actual original mementos, so preserving these, it's critical. Digitization is the final step in processing collections. It provides a use copy so that originals can be stored and used infrequently, limiting handling of the original, which may be brittle or damaged. This technology provides the benefit of enhancing retrieval and access. Once you've determined how you can implement a digital imaging project plan at your institution, you should create an informed workflow. Find out what best meets the mission of your organization. Focus on these goals and objectives. Consider your users and your audience. Make sure to prioritize your collections. Implement best practices and industry standards. Properly manage your assets. And of course, back everything up. So that's the end. I think I may have ended a little bit early, but it leaves some time for questions. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah? Okay. Let me get there. I can't see it. Sorry, Jason is helping. We've got some technical difficulties here. Okay, here we go. Sorry. Yeah.
Is WordPress considered a CMS?
WordPress, no, I don't think it's, WordPress is just sort of a web design. Yeah, I don't know if that, I don't know, that is definitely not, that would not be considered a CMS. If you have specific CMS questions or digital asset manager questions, I encourage you to email me separately because it's such a long topic and conversation. And if you have very specific questions on that, since that's not, necessarily my my area of expertise, but we work with people who do that. I could set you up with someone that can help you.
Can
Can,
you define the next scanners by name?
I'm sorry, I'm having some technical issues here. Okay. Here we go. Where do you see that? Okay, so someone says WordPress is a CMS. I guess since it does, oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking you were asking if it was a DAM. I did not know if it was a CMS or a DAM, but that does make sense because it is something that is allowing you to put images on a website. So I guess that does make sense. So thank you, Julia. Did you answer the question about the slides being made available? So slides will be made available. Can you not hear me? I see a question about repeating questions so we can hear. Oh, you'd like me to, I'm sorry. Okay. So the question here is, if USB or DVD are not recommended, what is suggested for offsite storage? I suggest looking into external hard drives. There are many different brands of hard drives that you can look into. Western Digital. There are so many different ones. I would say that you should look for something really depending on the size of your institution or how much you're looking to save. But the 1 terabyte drives these days are not that expensive and it will give you a little bit more potential for storage space. Yeah. Okay. Um, is that? And again, the question, there's a question about recommending any open source DAM system. It says, especially for archives and special collections with limited budgets but growing born digital collections. That's, again, a great question, Kim. I encourage you to send me an email and I will connect you with someone who can help you with that. There's a question if I have any examples of project plans for small historical societies or if there's something on the list. Yes, in that list, in those list of resources, there is something about project planning. I'd have to go back through. Again, if you want to send me an email, I can certainly point out which ones in particular. But yes, in the resources slide, I'd have to just look through it right now as far as which resource slide that is, but that will help you plan for a project. There's the IFLA. It's an entire slide. It's actually slide number 33, the guidelines for planning the digitization of rare book and manuscript collections. There is a nice overall in that. There's also the Stanford or the Cornell imaging tool. That's another resource that I listed, and that is another really great all-over one or comprehensive one. As far as there's a question, with OS changes, don't hard drives quickly become costly and obsolete? I mean, they can. I mean, we here at the Conservation Center have had some of the same drives for many years. So yes, they will ultimately become obsolete. So you need to figure that into your budget or decide what is best for you to use. But it's not going to be a year or two. They won't be obsolete. I don't believe so. Um, Um, sorry, Jody mentions tracking derivatives. Can I explain what I mean by that or give suggestions on how to do that? So tracking derivatives, really just keeping an eye on where these different derivatives are going. If you have a TIFF file that you've made a JPEG derivative of for your website, but then you've additionally made maybe another JPEG that maybe you need to send, I don't know, someone else in your institution that's maybe not as small as the one that went on the web. So now you've got two JPEG derivatives, both of a different size. I would say anything that you create that has to do with the original master, those should all live in the same folder. So if you have your TIFF master and all of your derivatives, they should all live in the same place so that later on you can say, oh, this was the website one, this was the one I sent to Tom. It might have Tom's name in it, or maybe it has the department or where you sent it. Something that you can identify what you did with that or why you did that, but I think they should all live together. I hope that helped. Great, great. Should I be reading some of people's answers? Can they see that? Should I read that? Um, I just want to note a couple of things people are saying in case you can't see this. Someone noted that smaller organizations can also work with regional library councils across New York, which explicitly help organizations with digitization, providing metadata guidance, project planning, and scanning instruction. That's great. Thank you, Deirdre. I'm not sure if I got all the questions. Somebody asked about paper photo damage from scanner illumination. I mean, this is such a huge topic that there are two different sides. Some of you have probably read about that. Some people say absolutely, and some people say absolutely not. And really, it depends on the actual scanner that you get and the amount of light that's being emitted. So this is something that before you purchase a scanner, before you start doing scanning, you should just look in to see what type of lighting is in there. But again, remember that a lot of commercial, especially a lot of, well, again, it depends on what side of the fence you're on, but a lot of them are not harmful. So it's just really means just a little more research on your part if you're concerned about that. Somebody asked what scanners by name can do both documents, photos, and slides. I know that Epson has the Epson Expression scanner, that line, I think it's called the Epson Expression. They can definitely do flat, paper, photo, film, slides. They have different attachments that go in there. So that's definitely something to look into, the Epson scanners, David. I think is that everything? Did I miss anyone's? I don't know if I hope I got everyone's question. There are a lot of questions. So I just want to make sure I got everything. Oh, someone said, oh, I asked a bit earlier if we can get a copy of today's PowerPoint. Yes, you can get a copy of the PowerPoint. Jason will be sending that to you. It'll also go on the blog. Does that help, Timothy? For the 3-2-1 rule, should be two different computers and not two different formats. Uh, there should be at least three copies on two different formats, meaning, well, formats or computers. It needs to basically be in at least two different, needs to live two different places at least. Or you should have maybe one on a computer, one on a hard drive, or yes, you can definitely put it on two different computers if you have two computers. You can find the blog, Marshall, at dipsny.org. And all of that information is on this last slide. It'll show you, well, there's Jason's information and our program coordinator's information as well. You can also go to dipsny.org and you can email info@dipsny.org for any of these questions as well. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just looking at some of the questions. Trying to. What's this? What's this? Oh, okay. Yeah. Slide said 2 different formats. Yeah, I mean, it is 2 different formats or 2 different places. You're right. Yeah. That's sort of the official rule. If you look it up, it says 2 different formats. Alrighty. Yeah. Anyone else have any questions, or is there anything I did not answer that? Again, if anyone needs to send me an email, if you want to email me about any of those CMS or DAM questions, again, I can refer you to someone that may be able to help you a little bit more about that. We don't really suggest particular ones. There are hundreds out there. I think there were around 60 people-ish today that participated. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I just want to say thank you so much. And again, you can catch the copy of the presentation on the DHPSNY blog, and you'll also get an email. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good day. Okay, this.